Picture this. You are standing on the precipice of ruin. The sky above is a bruise of purple and gray, spitting icy rain that feels like tiny daggers against your skin. In your arms, you hold the only thing that matters in the world. A newborn, wrapped in a thin blanket, his small body a fragile warmth against the biting cold. Before you stands a man of iron and stone, a man whose face is a mask of cruel possession. This is Jedediah Thorne, your father-in-law, and he has just stolen your future. The ground is a churning sea of mud, sucking at the hem of your mourning dress. Your husband, his son, has been in the ground for less than a week, and the earth is still too soft, too wounded, just like your heart. Jedediah's voice is the gravel of a fresh grave. The boy stays. He is a thorn. You are nothing. You were a vessel, and your purpose is served. His words are not a negotiation. They are a verdict. Beside him, his elder son, Marcus, smirks. His eyes, small and dark like a boar's, rake over you with contempt. He takes a step forward. Give us the baby, Alara, or we'll take him. You clutch your son, Leo, tighter. His tiny cry is swallowed by the rising wind. You look from Jedediah's granite face to Marcus's leering grin. These are the men who run this valley, who own the land, the cattle, the law. They are gods in this small, harsh world, and they are casting you out of paradise, out of the only home you have known. You shake your head, a silent, desperate plea. For a moment, you see your late husband, Thomas, in Jedediah's features. A flicker of the kindness you once loved, but it's an echo in an empty canyon. What remains is only greed. Marcus lunges. His hand snatches at the blanket, and you spin away, shielding Leo with your body. You stumble, your worn boot slipping in the mud. He grabs your arm, his fingers biting into your flesh like a vice. I said, "Give him here," he snarls, his breath hot and sour. A fire you never knew you possessed erupts in your chest. It is not the fire of love, or hope, or grief. It is pure, unadulterated rage. You scream, a raw, animal sound torn from the depths of your soul, and with your free hand, you claw at his face. He recoils, cursing, a thin line of red welling on his cheek. That is your final act of defiance. Jedediah nods once, a silent command. Marcus shoves you hard. You fall backward, landing with a sickening thud in the cold, wet mud. The impact jars a cry from Leo. For one terrifying second, you fear you have crushed him, but his wail, though weak, is strong. You scramble to your knees, a she-bear protecting her cub, your eyes locked on Jedediah. He doesn't even look at you. He looks at the stormy sky, at the vast expanse of thorn land stretching to the horizon. The storm will take care of the trash, he says, his voice flat and final. Then he turns, his heavy coat swirling around him, and walks back toward the warmth and light of the ranch house, a fortress you are now banished from. Marcus spits in your direction before following his father. The heavy oak door slams shut. The sound is an executioner's axe, and you are alone. Rain plasters your hair to your face. The cold has already begun to seep into your bones. You look down at Leo, his face puckered and red, his tiny fists clenched. In his innocent eyes, you see the reflection of a promise, a vow. You press your lips to his damp forehead and whisper into the raging wind, your voice a sliver of steel. I will not break, you promise him. I will survive, and one day they will pay. I swear it on my life. They will know what it is to lose everything. The world became a blur of wind, rain, and a crushing, desolate cold. Alara walked without direction, driven only by the primal instinct to put distance between her son and the monsters who had cast them out. She stumbled through tangled undergrowth, her thin dress tearing on thorny branches, her feet numb inside her soaked boots. The vow she had made was a single, hot ember in the frozen wasteland of her heart. It was the only thing keeping her moving. Hours bled into one another. The storm raged, a physical manifestation of the tempest in her soul. She grew weaker, her steps faltering. The ember of revenge was beginning to flicker, threatened by the overwhelming need for simple survival. She found a shallow overhang beneath a cluster of ancient pines, a meager shelter from the relentless downpour. There, she huddled, unwrapping Leo to check on him. He was cold, his skin pale, but he was breathing. She pressed him against her skin, beneath her dress and shawl, trying to share what little body heat she had left. Her milk was all she could offer him, and she prayed it would be enough. As darkness fell, a profound and terrifying despair began to set in. The world was vast and indifferent. Her vow felt like a child's shout against a hurricane. She was going to die here. Her son was going to die here. Her last thought before consciousness slipped away was not of revenge, but of failure. She had failed her son. A shadow fell over her. Not the shadow of a cloud, but of a man. He stood there, tall and broad, a figure carved from the mountain itself. His face was a landscape of harsh lines and old sorrows, dominated by a long silver scar that ran from his left temple down to the corner of his mouth, pulling his lips into a permanent, grim set. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, took in the scene with an unnerving stillness. He saw the woman, half-frozen and unconscious, and the tiny bundle clutched to her chest. A flicker of something, pain, memory, reluctance, crossed his features. He had come to this remote corner of the world to escape such things, to escape the wreckage of other people's lives. He was Silas, and he had long ago made a vow of his own, to be left alone. But the sight of the child, so impossibly small against the savagery of the wilderness, broke through the calloused walls he had built around his heart. He knelt, his movements economical and sure. With surprising gentleness, he touched the woman's neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, a faint, thready flutter. He looked at the baby, whose eyes were now open, staring up at him with a startling, silent gravity. In that moment, Silas's solitude was breached. He could not leave them. He would not leave them. He gathered Alara into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a fragile weight of bone and desperation. He adjusted her so that the baby remained securely pressed against her, and then he stood, with the woman and child held fast. He turned and began the long, arduous trek back up the mountain, toward the smoke that curled from the chimney of his hidden cabin, toward a future he never wanted, and a past he could no longer outrun. Alara awoke to the scent of wood smoke and pine. For a moment, she was suspended in confusion, her mind a fog. Then memory crashed down on her. The rain, the cold, Jedediah's cruel face. Panic seized her. Leo! Her voice was a dry, ragged croak. She tried to sit up, but her body was a leaden weight. A deep, calm voice spoke from the shadows of the room. The boy is safe. Her eyes darted toward the sound. A man sat in a simple wooden chair near a stone hearth, where a fire crackled with a comforting warmth. He was the man from her fading consciousness, the mountain shadow. He gestured with his chin toward a makeshift cradle near the fire. Leo was nestled inside, wrapped in a soft, clean deerskin, sleeping peacefully. The relief that washed over Alara was so immense it left her breathless. Tears welled and spilled down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. The man said nothing. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. He had cleaned her torn dress as best he could and covered her with a thick wool blanket. The cabin was small, just one room, but it was meticulously clean and orderly. Tools hung on the walls, and shelves were neatly stacked with dried herbs and provisions. It was a space built for solitude, a sanctuary of silence. Days turned into a week. Silas, as she learned he was called, was a man of few words. He moved with a quiet competence, tending to the fire, preparing simple broths for her, ensuring the cabin remained a warm haven against the lingering chill of the mountain. He treated her with a detached but profound respect. He never asked her what had happened. He never asked her where she came from. He simply provided. And in his silence, Alara began to heal. The physical exhaustion receded, replaced by a slow, returning strength. She spent her hours watching Leo, marveling at the resilience of his tiny life, or watching Silas, She saw the way his scarred hands could be so gentle as he carved a piece of wood, the way his gaze would sometimes drift toward the distant peaks, a deep and ancient sadness in his eyes. Slowly, she began to reclaim herself. She started by taking over the cooking, turning his simple rations into savory stews. She mended her dress with a needle and thread he provided without her having to ask. She insisted on chopping kindling, her movements clumsy at first, then growing more confident. She was not a guest. She would not be a burden. She was a survivor. They developed a rhythm, a silent dance of cohabitation. He would leave at dawn to check his trap lines, and she would have a hot meal waiting when he returned at dusk. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, the silence between them no longer awkward, but comfortable, filled only by the crackle of the flames and Leo's soft breaths. One night, Leo developed a fever. His cries were thin and pained, and his small body was frighteningly hot. Alara's fear was a cold knot in her stomach. Out here, miles from any doctor, a fever could be a death sentence. Silas acted immediately. He lit a lantern and went out into the night, returning with a bundle of herbs. He crushed them, mixing them with hot water to create a pungent poultice. "Willow bark," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "It will bring the fever down. And this," he added, pointing to another herb, "is yarrow." To fight the sickness for hours they worked together. He showed her how to apply the poultice to Leo's chest and forehead. She bathed him with cool water while Silas brewed a thin tea. They were a team, united in their desperate effort to save this one small life. Sometime before dawn, the fever broke. Leo's cries subsided into a peaceful sleep, his skin cool to the touch. Alara sat on the floor, leaning her head against the cradle, utterly spent. Silas came and sat near her, placing a cup of hot, sweet tea in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He simply nodded, his gaze on the sleeping child. "A life is a precious thing to fight for," he said, and the words seemed to come from a place of deep, personal knowledge. The shared crisis had irrevocably changed the air between them. The dam of silence had broken. A few nights later, as a gentle snow fell outside, blanketing the mountain in white, Alara found the courage to speak. "His name is Jedediah Thorne," she said the name and watched Silas's face. A muscle in his jaw tightened. The stillness in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something dark and cold. He knew the name. "He was my husband's father," she continued, and the entire story poured out of her. The love she had for Thomas, his unexpected death, Jedediah's cruelty, and the vow she had made in the mud and the rain. She spoke of her need for revenge, a fire that had been banked by the struggle for survival, but was now beginning to glow once more. When she finished, the only sound was the hiss of snowflakes melting against the windowpane. Silas stared into the fire, his expression grim. "Revenge is a barren land," he said, his voice rough. "It offers no harvest, only dust." "He tried to kill my son," Alara said, her own voice hard as flint. "He left us to die. That isn't something you forgive. That is something you answer." Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he rose and walked to a heavy wooden chest in the corner of the cabin. He opened it, the hinges groaning in protest. He reached inside and pulled out a rifle smaller and lighter than his own hunting gun. It was beautifully crafted, the stock worn smooth with use. He held it out to her. "If you are to survive on this mountain," he said, his eyes meeting hers, "it will not be with hate. It will be with skill. Tomorrow I will teach you how to shoot." It was not an endorsement of her quest for revenge. It was something more. It was an acceptance of her presence, an acknowledgement of her fight. He was no longer just her rescuer. He was becoming her ally. The next morning, under a sky as clear and cold as glass, Alara held the rifle. It was heavy, a solid weight of wood and steel. Silas stood behind her, adjusting her stance, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "Breathe out. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull it. Feel the balance." Her first shot was wide, the recoil shocking her shoulder. But she did not flinch. She loaded another cartridge, her movements deliberate. She breathed. She squeezed. The shot rang out, echoing across the silent valley. And this time it hit its mark. The seasons turned on the mountain. Winter's deep snow gave way to the tender green of spring, which ripened into the lush abundance of summer. Alara's hands, once soft, became calloused and capable. Under Silas's patient tutelage, she learned the language of the wilderness. She learned to track a deer, to read the clouds for signs of a coming storm, to identify which plants could heal and which could kill. She learned to be silent, to be still, to be aware. The rifle became an extension of her own will, her aim true and steady. Her desire for revenge had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer a wild, consuming fire. It had been forged and tempered into something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Resolve. She was not just fighting for vengeance anymore. She was fighting for a future, for a life of peace for her son, a life that could only be secured once the shadow of Jedediah Thorne was gone forever. Leo grew from a helpless infant into a curious toddler. He took his first steps on the rough-hewn floor of the cabin, his laughter filling the small space that had once been defined by silence. He was a child of the mountain, unafraid of the wind or the cry of a distant hawk. He adored Silas, following him around like a small shadow, and a gentle paternal warmth began to thaw the winter in the man's soul. He would carve small animals for the boy from scraps of wood, his scarred hands moving with an artist's precision. He would carry Leo on his broad shoulders as he checked his traps, pointing out the tracks of a fox or the flight of an eagle. In these moments, Alara saw the man Silas might have been, the man he could still become. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the peaks in hues of orange and rose, Alara finally asked the question that had hung between them for over a year. "What did he do to you, Silas? What did Jedediah Thorne do to your family?" Silas did not look at her. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, on the valley below that was Thorne territory. His voice, when it came, was flat, stripped of all emotion. "He did what he always does. He coveted what wasn't his. My family owned the land downstream from his ranch. We had the water rights. Our land was green. His was. Less so." He paused, the silence stretching. "He tried to buy it. My father refused. This was our home. So Thorne found another way. He dammed the creek upstream illegally. He choked our water to a trickle. Our crops withered. Our cattle died of thirst." He picked up a small stone, turning it over and over in his palm. "My father tried to fight him with the law, but Jedediah owned the law. He owned the judge, the sheriff. He bankrupted my father with legal fees and then foreclosed on our land for pennies on the dollar. He ruined us." Alara's heart ached for him. She reached out and placed her hand over his. He flinched at the contact but did not pull away. "My father!" Silas's voice cracked for the first time. "He couldn't live with the shame. My mother..." Her heart gave out a year later. "I was all that was left. I came up here to disappear. To forget." "But you didn't forget," Alara said softly. "No," he said, his hand finally closing around hers. "I didn't forget." Now she understood the depths of his solitude, the source of his pain. Their fight was not just hers. It had always been his, too. Down in the valley, Jedediah Thorne had not been idle. The initial mystery of Alara's disappearance had hardened into a cold certainty. She had died in the storm, a fitting end for a defiant whelp. He had legally declared her dead and solidified his claim as sole guardian of his lost grandson. But whispers were stubborn things. Trappers and prospectors passing through the town of Redemption spoke of a ghost in the high peaks, a woman with hair the color of wheat, often seen with a small child. At first, Jedediah dismissed it as mountain folklore. But the stories persisted. They became more detailed. A reclusive mountain man, a protector. The description of the woman was too close. The timeline was too perfect. Doubt grew into suspicion, and suspicion festered into a raging obsession. The boy, his heir, his legacy was alive. And that woman, that piece of trash he had thrown out, had stolen him. His rage was immense. Marcus, ever his father's blunt instrument, fueled the fire. She's mocking you, father. Living up there with some wild man, raising your grandson as a savage. The whole valley will laugh at you. That was all it took. Jedediah's pride could not stomach the thought of being defied, of being made a fool. He put a bounty on their heads, not for their capture but for information. He sent riders into the foothills, pressuring settlers for any word, any sighting. The net was closing. One afternoon, Silas returned early from a trip to a distant trading post, his face set in grim lines. He carried not just supplies but news. He laid a worn piece of paper on the table. It was a wanted poster, but not for a criminal. It was a notice, offering a handsome reward for any information leading to the location of Alara and a young boy named Leo. For their safe return to their loving grandfather, Jedediah Thorne Alara stared at the crudely drawn sketch of her face. Felt like a violation. He knows, she whispered. He's hunting us. He is, Silas confirmed, his voice low. It's no longer a matter of if he finds us. It's a matter of when the sanctuary was no longer safe. The peace they had carefully built was about to be shattered. Alara looked at Leo, who was playing happily on the floor with a wooden eagle Silas had made him. A fierce, protective fire ignited in her eyes. She had learned to survive. Now she would have to learn to fight. She looked at Silas, her expression unwavering. We don't run, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Silas agreed, his gaze meeting hers, a silent pact passing between them. We don't run. We make our stand. Here their pasts had finally caught up to them. The mountain that had been their refuge was about to become their battleground. They prepared for war. Silas, drawing on a past he never spoke of but which was evident in his every move, turned the cabin into a fortress. He barred the windows, reinforced the door, and mapped out fields of fire. He showed Alara how to reload 3 rifles in succession, keeping a steady rhythm of defense. They stockpiled food, water, and ammunition. The work was grim, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. They were no longer just a man and a woman who had found solace together. They were soldiers bracing for an inevitable assault. The attack came at dawn. A thick fog clung to the mountainside, muffling sound and turning the familiar landscape into a ghostly maze. It was Marcus who led the charge, with a dozen hired guns at his back, men whose loyalty was bought with thorn silver. The first shot shattered the morning's quiet, splintering the wood next to the window where Alara kept watch. The siege had begun. Chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the valley as Silas and Alara returned fire, their movements a synchronized, deadly dance. He would fire and she would have another rifle loaded and ready for him, before taking her own shot from a different vantage point. They were outnumbered, but they had the advantage of high ground and desperation. They were fighting for more than just land or money. They were fighting for a life, for family. Hours crawled by. The cabin was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the deafening roar of gunfire. One of the attackers made a foolish dash for the door and was cut down by Alara's steady aim. A grim satisfaction settled in her. She was no longer a victim cowering in the mud. She was a protector, a warrior. As the sun reached its zenith, Silas knew they couldn't win a prolonged siege. I have to break them, he said, his voice tight. Draw their fire. Pin them down from the west flank. It's too dangerous. Alara protested, her heart seizing with fear. It's the only way, he replied, his eyes locking on hers. He touched her cheek, his callous thumb brushing away a smudge of gunpowder. Keep him safe before she could argue. He was gone, slipping out a small, hidden escape hatch at the back of the cabin and disappearing into the fog and trees like a phantom. The full force of the attack now fell on her. Bullets tore through the walls. She kept firing, moving from window to window, trying to make it seem as though they were both still inside. She could hear Marcus shouting orders, his voice raw with frustration. Then, a new barrage of shots erupted from the west. It was Silas. He was drawing their attention, creating the diversion they needed. In the ensuing confusion, the main assault on the cabin faltered. She saw her chance. Down below, Marcus Thorne, enraged and impatient, broke cover, moving toward Silas's position. Silas met him head-on. The two men crashed together in a brutal, primal fight. It was not a battle of skill, but of pure, unrestrained violence. As they fought, Jedediah Thorne himself appeared from the fog, making his way toward the cabin, his face a mask of triumphant fury. This was it, the final confrontation. He kicked open the door. The cabin was a wreck, splintered and smoking. Alara stood in the center of the room, a rifle in her hands. But it was not pointed at him. It was held loosely at her side. Leo was behind her, peeking out from the shelter of a heavy, overturned table. Jedediah's eyes were fixed on the boy. "My grandson," he breathed, a possessive hunger in his voice. He took a step forward. "He comes with me. This foolishness is over." Alara stood her ground. Her voice, when she spoke, was not filled with fear or hate, but with an unshakable calm. "His name is Leo, and he is my son. He is not a piece of property. He is not your legacy." Jedediah laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "He has Thorn blood. That is all the legacy that matters. Does he?" Alara's words were quiet but cut through the air like a razor. "Thomas told me everything before he died, Jedediah. He told me how ashamed he was of you, how he planned to take us far away from here, to leave the Thorn name and its poison behind. He didn't want his son to become you." The words struck Jedediah harder than any bullet could have. His face contorted, a mixture of disbelief and rage. "Lies," he roared. "He was weak, but he was my son. He was a good man." Alara corrected him, her voice ringing with truth. "And his son will be a good man. He will learn honor, and kindness, and compassion. Everything you choked out of this family, your line, your legacy of greed and cruelty, ends here. It dies with you outside." The sounds of the fight had ceased. The remaining hired guns, who had followed Jedediah to the door, heard every word. They saw the wild, obsessive look in the old man's eyes. They saw the fierce, dignified woman protecting her child. They saw a family dispute that had escalated into madness. This wasn't what they had been paid for. One by one, they began to back away, melting back into the fog. They were abandoning him. Jedediah looked from Alara to the doorway, seeing his power, his authority, dissolving before his very eyes. He was alone, defeated not by force, but by truth. Silas appeared in the doorway, bruised and bleeding, but victorious. He stood beside Alara, a silent, unmovable guardian. Jedediah Thorne stared at the three of them. A woman he had dismissed, a man he had ruined, and a child he could never have. They were a family, forged in fire and loss, and they had taken everything from him. Without another word, he turned and stumbled away, a broken king leaving his fallen kingdom, disappearing into the mist. The mountain was quiet again. The fog lifted, revealing a sky washed clean by the conflict. In the weeks that followed, they rebuilt. They patched the bullet holes in the walls of the cabin, each repair a testament to what they had survived. They buried the past and began to plant a future. The revenge Alara had sworn in the mud was complete, but it was not the victory she had imagined. It wasn't the satisfaction of seeing Jedediah destroyed that filled her heart. It was the quiet joy of watching Leo chase a butterfly in a field of wildflowers. It was the warmth of Silas's hand in hers as they watched the sunset. It was the peace that settled over their small home each night. Her true revenge was not in tearing down Jedediah's life, but in building her own. A life so full of light and love that the darkness he represented could never touch them again. So, let me ask you, what is the nature of true strength? Is it found in the power to dominate others, to bend the world to your will? Or is it found in the resilience to endure, the courage to protect, and the grace to build a new life from the ashes of the old? Alara faced an evil that sought to erase her, to treat her as nothing more than a vessel. But she refused to be defined by her oppressors. She found her power not in vengeance, but in love and the creation of a new family. How many of us have faced our own Jedediah Thorne in one form or another? An injustice that sought to break our spirit? A loss that threatened to swallow us whole? Alara's story reminds us that the greatest victory is not to destroy our enemies, but to outlive them with joy, to build a legacy of kindness where they sowed only cruelty. If you were moved by Alara's journey from victim to victor, let us know in the comments below. What does true revenge mean to you? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of the indomitable human spirit.